So if you're new here, I just want to welcome you. One of the things that we do around here is you'll notice that there's Steve and I, where we kind of team up when we teach. Usually the rotation is 2 on, 2 off, and so I did last week and this week, and he'll get the next 2. Sometimes that shifts. Like in the summer, he just refuses to work on his birthday. I don't know what's up with that. So maybe we'll do 3 weeks, and then he does 2, whatever. That's kind of how it works, and we like that because it gives you different perspectives. Steve and I are very similar, but we're also very different, and so what you get is 2 different styles and 2 different ways of seeing the Scripture, and I think, I believe that kind of opens up new things for people who are here to understand what God has said, and so that's kind of why we do that. We're in the book of Mark, and this is kind of like week 4 in the book of Mark, and we're just calling this series Marked because we're very clever. I don't know if you've noticed that around here. We're very clever. Did you get it marked? Because it's Mark. Okay, anyway. So we're in the middle of this book. And kind of what we decided when we sat down and said, okay, I think that God is kind of calling us to preach out of the book of Mark. Our vision for this was that we would, as a church, spend our second year in existence with Jesus. That we would just kind of follow him around as he ministers to the people, as he brings the kingdom, as he works his miracles, and that we would get to know him in a deeper and more intimate way in his word, but also in our own souls, that having that deep and intimate relationship with him. And so that's kind of our vision for this year, that we would together spend a year with Jesus. And so we're going to be, for the most part of this year, we're going to be in Mark. And one of the things that is interesting about this passage, when we sat down and we said, okay, Jesus is calling us to do Mark, I think what we should do as a ministry staff is we should sit down and we'll just read the entire book, cover to cover, all the way through in one sitting. Have you ever done that with a book of the Bible? I would do that with Philemon. It's only 1 page. You've done real fast. One of the things that I noticed when we sat down to do this is that it took us about an hour. And it's just an hour, that kind of shocked me. It's just an hour. I spend an hour sometimes just on my beard in the morning. I mean, it looks amazing, but it takes work to do that. So, no, I'm just kidding. But sometimes we spend an hour on like silly things. It's just an hour. We could read the entire book of Scripture. So what would it look like if today you sat down? Oh wait, it's the Super Bowl today. Never mind. You're probably good Americans, so Super Bowl. What if you sat down like an hour? Oh, tomorrow's The Bachelor. Just kidding. So Tuesday, what if you sat down and it was just an hour in Scripture? I think that you could read the whole book. And here's what you would notice, and here's kind of what I took away. In any story, just like this story, there are these moments that are climactic, They're the moments that you walk away from the book and you remember. Like Jesus comes and he announces the kingdom in the beginning of the book. He says, the time is fulfilled, the kingdom of God is at hand. It's this major historical announcement, and just one of these climaxes in the course of history. And then there's these other things that he does. He heals a bunch of people. There's one story where he's in the boat and there's a storm going on. And the disciples are freaking out. They're like, "We're gonna die, Jesus!" And he's like, "No, you're not." And he just calms everything. And they're like, "Who is this dude? He's amazing." And there's this other story, where he feeds 5,000 and then he feeds 4,000 people at a separate time. He's just into feeding a lot of people. And this is a guy I could get to know, And then there's at the end, there's this, there's the climax of the entire book is that he dies and he rises again. So you remember these high points, but when I read it all the way through, one of the things that I realized that I didn't, just kind of struck me was that in between these sort of mountaintop things in this story, there's a lot of connecting stories that you don't remember as well. It's not that they're boring. It's not that they're not life-giving. It's just that they're not the big stories that you remember. And our passage today is kind of one of those stories. It's a story that kind of bridges the gap between 2 amazing stories. And it's one of those things that I think that we could be tempted to think it's kind of ordinary. In fact, one of the commentators called this passage that we're going to be in, they called it a day in the life of Jesus. It's just a day in the life. It's just his day-to-day. This is what Jesus is like in his day-to-day. And he's going to heal some people, and a whole crowd is going to gather. And you'd be tempted to be like, well, that sounds big. But here's the thing. Jesus does that all the time. It's like status quo for him. If he wasn't healing people, you'd be like, okay, what are you doing, man? It'd be weird. And so here's the thing. This passage, I think you could be tempted, and I was earlier this week, I was tempted to believe that this is kind of ordinary. Like there's not much here. But as I was praying, one of the things that I realized is that when God puts on flesh and comes and dwells with us, there is nothing ordinary about that. There is nothing boring about God in the flesh. And so here's what we're going to see today. That in Jesus' day-to-day, in a day in the life of Jesus, what we're going to see is he's actually doing something that I think is revolutionary for us as American Christians. And what we're going to see is that Jesus has a rhythm in his day-to-day. He has a rhythm. I don't know if you know this, but rhythm is really important. Your rhythm. Your rhythm is what helps you go the distance. I was listening to a podcast, and they were interviewing this mega distance runners. Have you ever heard of these people who they don't just run a marathon? They'll run like hundreds of miles. Like they do like the whole Appalachian Trail. Where I'm like, okay, I'll run for 30 seconds. That's about what you get from me. And these people are like, no, I'm doing hundreds of miles, and I think you're just so weird. You're just so weird. I don't understand you. And so this reporter was interviewing this lady, and he was like, how do you do this? And she said, I just sink into my rhythm. And he's like, what? Can you explain that for me? She says, yeah. Here's what I do. I start running, and I get my steps paced. Step, 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 step. And then I pair that with my breathing. In, out, out. In, out, out. Step, 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 step. In, out, out. Like that. That's how she goes. And she said, I just sink into that, and I forget everything else, and I forget what my legs are telling me if they're in pain. I forget what my body is saying that maybe, hey, don't do this, man. No, I just sink into my rhythm. And she says, it's like I'm resting while I'm running. Because all of a sudden, none of this matters. The only thing that matters is that I'm running. And she's like, it is so life-giving. And I'm like, while you're running, okay, weird. Fine for you. But here's the thing, her rhythm helps her go that distance. Sometimes I think that we think that our spiritual journeys, and it's a journey. Peter calls us exiles and sojourners. Paul very often refers to sanctification as a process. It's a journey. Sometimes we think that the spiritual journey, our spiritual progress, is that we make progress in these mountaintop moments. Like when you come to church and the worship is just, if for some reason it is just on that morning for you and you're like loving it, and you don't usually raise your hands, but you got two hands in the air and you're just like, yes, and like people are looking at you, but you're like, I don't care, and you're kind of like, okay, maybe I didn't put deodorant on this morning, but I don't care. This is for God. It's the only thing that matters. And we have these mountaintop experiences, and I think that we think that that's when we grow spiritually. But here's what I want to put before you today. We do grow spiritually in those moments, but it's like a sprint. You go a short distance really fast. And so it feels like progress because you're moving faster than normal. But here's where the majority of spiritual growth happens. It's in your day-to-day. It's in your day-to-day. In fact, when you can start seeing changes in your day-to-day, that's when you know that God is really changing me. I don't know if you've ever done this at the end of the year, but just kind of thought, where was I in January and where am I now? I don't know if you've ever had that moment where you're like, wow, I was really struggling with this. I really had an attitude like this about this, and I really had this problem in our relationships, and here it is, it's December, and it's different. And then you try to go back through, when did that change? Sometimes we don't know when it changes because the change is so slow, but slow change over a long time leads to lasting impact. And that's where the majority of spiritual growth happens. However, what's really crucial here is your rhythm. Because sometimes in the day-to-day, we can set up and structure our day-to-day in a way that makes us grow slowly, that makes us not grow at all, or that makes us grow really fast. And what we're going to see today is Jesus' rhythm, the way that he lived his life, how he structured his life, and how he kind of went about that rhythm. And here's the point, that if we can structure our day like he did, if we can just include the things that he included and do it the way that he did it, here's what I would guess. I would guess that if you developed his rhythm, you would start seeing some dramatic changes, that you would go further in your relationship with God. I used to do CrossFit. It was a while ago, and I say a while ago because you might look at me and be like, oh, I don't think he works out. I don't. It's just true. I own it. It's what it is. I used to do CrossFit, and I wasn't one of those crazy CrossFit people. You got Jesus, and then you got CrossFit. And you just gotta get saved and go to CrossFit. That's people are like that, and I'm sorry about them. They're poor representatives. Anyway, I used to do CrossFit. I loved it. I loved it because of this idea of a rhythm. This is the big thing that I learned, is that your rhythm matters. It is so important. And especially it's because we would do this motion, this movement, where you're breathing, and how you did the movement really, really mattered. Okay, this movement was called thrusters, and basically what you would do is with the thrusters, you get a barbell, and you have it on your chest like this, and you're standing up, and you got about 95 pounds for guys, and I can't remember what it was for girls, but so you get 95 pounds, and the movement is this: you squat down like this, and then you stand up, and you go to overhead. That's a thruster. Okay. Now here's the thing: your posture is crucial when you're doing a thruster, because if you're too far forward, when you go down, you'll drop the weight. It's too heavy for you to just hold there. And if you're strong enough to hold it there, you actually end up doing way more work because you're holding it here instead of back here where it can just rest. You understand what I mean? Your posture, how you did that movement, was crucial. But not just your posture, it was also your breathing. This was the trickiest thing in this motion. You can't breathe down here because you're crunched up. Your chest can't expand. You can't get a good breath. But sometimes in the middle of the movement, you would get so tired and so out of breath that you'd be tempted to just sit here like this and try and breathe. And it's very tempting because you're just so tired. You're doing a set of 30 of these, and you're just down here, and you're taking these shallow breaths, and you can't really get in what you need to get in. Most people thought it was smart to breathe here because that stinks. You don't want to breathe down there. You would think, I'm not going to breathe there, so where do I breathe? I'll breathe here. The problem with that is all of your muscles are engaged in holding this weight to your chest. And it's hard when you're to get a good breath. And so what the experts would say, the people who do it best, the people who have the right rhythm, they would tell you this: you breathe up here. Because what you do is you lock your arms out and you lock your shoulders in place, and it just kind of stays there. And you can kind of disengage your chest muscles, and you can take the deepest breath. It's up here. It's kind of counterintuitive because most people would think, let's breathe here. And here's the reason why most people settle for breathing here, because it's not this. And I think sometimes in our spiritual walk, what we think is we're doing the right thing because we're not as bad as the other people. Sometimes in our spiritual walk, we get satisfied with the progress that we're making because we're not like the other people. But I think we're asking the wrong question. I think the question is, how do I do the best rhythm to get me more of Jesus? Because here's the truth about Jesus: there is always more in him. And so instead of looking at other people and saying, okay, I'm better than you, so I must be doing good, I think we have to shift our perspective. How do we get the best rhythm to make the maximum impact in our lives? And to do that, we're going to see how Jesus structured his life. We're going to look into his rhythm so that if you're down here, you can make some drastic changes so that you can take a deep breath up here. Or maybe if you're sitting here and you're just kind of you're satisfied and you just think, oh, I'm good enough. What I want you to do is to think, what if I had more? What if I had more? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to be in Mark chapter 1. And we're going to start in verse 29, not Romans. That's where I went to first. I don't know why. We're going to be in Mark. Mark chapter 1, verse 29. We're going to see Jesus' rhythm, and here's what he does. And immediately, he left the synagogue. Okay, let me just stop there and give you kind of a backstory here. Remember last week, Jesus goes into the synagogue, and it's kind of like church, but back then it was very different. They didn't have a rock band, and the structure was very different. And so Jesus goes in, and he's teaching in this synagogue, and everybody's like, whoa, he's a good teacher. Like, wow. And I'm like, yeah, it's Jesus, duh. And but they didn't know that. So anyway, so Jesus is teaching, and they're like, whoa. And then all of a sudden, as he's teaching, this guy who is possessed by a demon starts talking to him. And he's like, Jesus, why are you here? You're the Son of God. I know who you are. And Jesus casts out this demon. So here's this is like in Capernaum, okay? It's kind of like a small town. They weren't used to having a good teacher. They weren't used to having miracles happen. And all of a sudden, everybody in the crowd is like, whoa, this is a game changer. And what happens is, the synagogue time is kind of over, and it was the Sabbath when you went to the synagogue, so they're supposed to be resting. And so back then, the rabbis had set like this limit of steps that you could take that constituted work. And so if you took this many steps, then you were working, but if you took less than that many steps, then you weren't working. And so what you would do is you probably had just enough to make it to the synagogue and then back home. So I want to paint this picture for you because if you're there, you just saw Jesus do this amazing thing that you never thought was possible. And then all of a sudden, you have to leave, but you can't follow him because it's the Sabbath. You got to go home. And so Steve has been here. He's been in this place where Jesus was, and they go to Peter's house. And Peter's house, he says, is like it's like basically across the street. And so they go there, and as you're walking out, you see Jesus go into this home, and what you're doing is you're like, take a note. He went there. As soon as Sabbath is over, that's where I'm going. And so that's kind of the context. That's what's happening. And Jesus says, and Mark says, and immediately he left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew. Simon is Peter. Jesus is going to change his name later. His brother is Andrew, with James and John. Now, you know John because he wrote 5 books of the Bible. John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. You're like, oh, you're kind of getting it. He puts his name on books. And then Revelation. That's John, okay? And his brother James. And so he enters Peter's house with Andrew and James and John. Now, Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever. And immediately they told him about her. And he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her. And she began to serve them. In the Jewish rhythm, in the way that they structured their day actually started in the evening at sundown. That's when their day started. Like for us, it starts in the morning, but for them, it started in the evening. And the way they would start and begin their day is with family. They would sit in community, in their relationships. They'd have a meal. And so Jesus goes to his buddy's house because it's time for relationships. That's part of his rhythm. That's the first thing that we're looking at is Jesus' rhythm. The first thing he starts with is relationships. And I want you to see this. It's not just that he has this rhythm. It's not just that he has relationships. It's how he goes about those relationships. And what we see here is that Jesus, in his rhythm of relationships, he has another rhythm in which he gives and he receives. Jesus is a giver. I don't know if you knew that. All over, we see these stories about the people that he's in relationship with. He's constantly giving to them. One of Jesus' best friends, his name is Lazarus, and over the course of Jesus' life, Lazarus dies. You remember what Jesus does for Lazarus? Brings him back to life. He's like, not yet. Brings him back to life. That's what Jesus does. He gives. There's a tradition tells us that Mary Magdalene, this woman who was there to receive the announcement that Jesus has resurrected from the dead, that he's alive. Tradition tells us that she had a ton of demons, and he had delivered her from those demons. Jesus is a giver. When he has a relationship with you, he's giving. But I want you to see the way he gives in this relationship. So he goes to Simon, that's Peter. He goes to his mother-in-law, and you have to pay attention to the verbs because there's a ton of verbs in this passage. And so Mark is trying to cue our attention to focus on this. He says, and he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her. I want you to see this, that when Jesus gives, he comes to you. I don't know if you've ever had this moment where you're like in a relationship and you're like, you live with the person because they're family, but there's distance between you. For Jesus, what giving means is bridging that gap. For Jesus, it means coming to that person. And I think sometimes that distance happens because there's hurt. That distance happens because we just become negligent, like we've been too busy and we stop focusing on our relationships. But here's what I want you to see. In Jesus' rhythm, he gives. And the way that he gives, he comes to her. He bridges that gap. He decreases that distance. What would it look like today if maybe you forgave somebody that hurt you and you closed that distance? What would it look like if maybe you thought about, okay, here's some, my kids have been just, terrors lately. Maybe they're teenagers, and you're like, okay, I've been withdrawing because it's been hard for me. What would it look like if you bridged that gap? If you gave in your relationships? But Jesus doesn't stop there. He comes to her. He takes her by the hand. And you have to see how personal this is. She's laying on her sick bed, okay? She's sick. And in Jewish society, she would have been expected, okay, we got a rabbi here. She's expected to go up and serve him and make him food and do all this stuff, but she's sick. And so she's laying there thinking, oh man, I'm completely failing. I'm a failure right now. I wish that I wasn't sick because I'm completely dropping the ball in what I'm supposed to do. And Jesus, who's got like 3 years to save the world, right? He takes time out of his day and he comes to her and he takes her by the hand. You just have to see that she probably isn't expecting that. She probably is more expecting, hey, why aren't you serving me right now? Why aren't you living up to the cultural standard? Well, why is it that you're sick? Like, can't you just get over it? Jesus comes to her and he grabs her by the hand. It's so tender. And in this moment, it's as if Jesus is saying, hey, I don't care about the cultural standards. I don't care if you're failing or winning. I don't care if I have stuff to do. I'm taking time out of my day just for you. I'm going to take you by the hand. I don't know if you've done that recently in your relationships. Maybe in your marriage, you helped your spouse to feel like they were the only thing that mattered to you in that moment. Make them feel special, be tender with them. Jesus comes to her, he takes her by the hand, then he lifts her up. You got to see this. Relationships with Jesus, what he's giving, they're literally uplifting. He's so encouraging. I think a lot of us think of God and Jesus as this big angry dude in the sky, and he's big and he's in the sky, and it does say in the Psalms that he feels anger every day. But here's the deal. If you are his child, then what we believe is that Jesus took that anger for you. That God can't be angry with you because that would be unjust. Because that would mean that Jesus' sacrifice wasn't enough. Jesus is literally uplifting. He lifts you up. That's what it's like when Jesus gives. But Jesus doesn't just give, he also receives. As soon as he comes to her, he lifts her up, or he takes her by the hand, he lifts her up, and then the fever leaves her. And then she began to serve him. I think that this is amazing. And I think it's crucial for us to understand because we don't often think about this. Sometimes we have relationships in which we feel obligated to give, and we never stop to receive. And so this is like if you have a friend who's maybe like kind of needy right now, or maybe you're a mom and you just have a ton of kids. And here's the thing. I think that sometimes if we're in this rhythm in which we're constantly giving and never receiving, it's kind of like breathing at the bottom. It's kind of like being crunched up. You're putting forth so much effort. There's a ton of output, but there's no input. And I think that if you have a rhythm that's sustainable in relationships, it looks like Jesus. It gives and it receives. And so, moms, let me just talk to you for a second because I'm married to one, and she's amazing. What would it look like if you took a little bit of time for yourself? If you just trusted somebody else with your kids for an hour? Take some time to receive, to let somebody do something for you, to give to you. What would that look like? Or maybe you're the kind of person who is just like type A, super driven, I'm going to do everything, and you're just worried about your to-do list, and you're constantly moving, going, giving, and you're never receiving. It's like breathing at the bottom. It's going to lead to burnout. You'll get so tired that you won't be able to carry on, and your relationships are going to begin to crumble. And here's the lie that I think we often believe, that if I don't give, then it's going to crumble. But here's the truth. If you never stop to receive, if you never stop for input and you're constantly outputting, your relationship are going to crumble anyway. And so Jesus gives and he receives. It's his rhythm within the rhythm. His day starts with relationships, and he gives and he receives. So Jesus does this. The next thing we're going to see is that Jesus' rhythm, he's supposed to be having relational time. He's supposed to be spending time with his family, but he's not so rigid in his rhythm. He's actually pretty free. It's flexible. And I want you to see this because this is the time in which you would eat dinner and you'd enjoy each other, okay? That's what he's supposed to be doing. But here's what happens. This is verse 32. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. So here's what's going on here. The Sabbath has ended. It's sundown. The Jewish day started in the evening and ended in the evening the next day. So the Sabbath has just ended. And now all the people, it's time for relationships, but all the people are like, hey, Jesus, I saw you cast out a demon. I got this friend who acts weird sometimes. Maybe you can help him out. Have you ever had one of those? We're like, oh, I think you got a demon, bro. Woof. I just thought of something funny, but it's kind of inappropriate. So anyway, move on. And so they bring all these people to Jesus at the door, And Jesus is supposed to be having relationship time, but I want you to see this. He's flexible because he's loving, because people need him. And so what he does is he pauses and he goes and he helps these people. Now, you have to kind of keep track of the time here because he starts helping them at sundown. It says the whole city came to his door. This wasn't a 5-minute deal, you know? Like, we never see Jesus healing the entire crowd with just one word. Have you ever noticed that? He never, like, the masses come to them and he just says, y'all's healed, see you tomorrow. He never says that. He heals on an interpersonal level, one-to-one. He always does that because he wants to take time for the individual. Because his rhythm is flexible enough to incorporate even you. And so Jesus heals all these people, and like I said, that probably wasn't a 5-minute deal. It probably lasted a couple hours, and so we're talking like late into the night, he's healing people, okay? That's kind of a part of his rhythm. He's flexible. And so he starts with relationships, and he's flexible, he takes some time there, and the next piece of rhythm in the Jewish rhythm is that they would rest. They would have dinner together, and then they'd go to sleep, right? And this is kind of what Jesus does. He kind of turns it on his head. This is verse 35. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went to a desolate place where he prayed. I want you to see this. He's supposed to be resting. He's supposed to be sleeping. But Jesus knows that there is a deeper rest that he needs. That he just spent time ministering to people. He just spent time giving. He needs to receive a little bit. He needs to rest a little bit. And so what he does is he actually pauses his physical rest. And I don't want you to hear that you shouldn't sleep, because you should sleep because we've been around you when you didn't sleep, and maybe you should get some sleep. But here's the thing. Jesus says physical rest is important. He did sleep. It says that he rose early, which means he did go to bed, okay? So he did sleep, but he knows that there is a deeper rest that his soul needs. And you have to pay attention to the verbs, because this is amazing. He says, and rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed. He went to a desolate place, and there he prayed. You have to see how intentional this is for Jesus. He gets up, he leaves where he's at, and he goes somewhere that's desolate. The word desolate means lonely or solitary. It means that there wasn't anybody there. And so what Jesus does is he's so intentional about getting this spiritual rest. You have to see how he's setting this up. Here's his rhythm. He rises, he leaves, he goes, and he prays. Now, I live in a house. I've got 4 kids. I've got two of our own, and 2 foster kids who are 9 months old, and we've got 1 on the way. I don't think I've said that public yet. My wife's pregnant. Anyway, yeah, it's pretty sweet. I'm pretty happy about it. So we're about to have 5 kids. This is what I'm saying. The word desolate is not a word you could use to describe my house, okay? Like, it starts at 6 in the morning, and my oldest 2 will, for some reason, it's like their first job is to go wake up everybody else. And it's just like, if you would just wake me up, then I could help you out, and then the twins could sleep a little bit, whatever. So my house is not a desolate place. Here's what I try to do, and here's what I would encourage you to do, to find a space that you can get some peace and quiet. This is what Jesus did. To find his rest, he found a place that was desolate. I have an office. We live in the Old West End, and so we have one of these beautiful, beautiful old houses, and there's just a lot of extra space, and so we made an extra room in my office, and I have my favorite chair, and I sit in that chair, and that's where I pray. And if I shut all the doors, and I turn a fan on, and maybe the air conditioner, then I can hear nobody, and it's perfect. And you have to find that place of peace and quiet. Because I don't know if you know this, noise, you tend to pay attention to it. Music, it tends to rev you up. Jesus finds this desolate place. And I want you to see this. For his rest, he prays. For his rest, he prays. I think this is amazing. When part of my story is that God, at the age of 19, just like gripped my heart and transformed me from a jock to a nerd. Major transformation. And all of a sudden, instead of wanting to just go to the gym all the time and work out, all I wanted to do was to read more about him. I just wanted to know more. I was so thirsty for understanding who he is. But at some point in my mid-20s, something shifted, and I read a ton. It's still my favorite thing one of my favorite things to do. But here's kind of what shifted. I realized that learning things about God has got nothing on being with God. Like, learning things and doing things for God has got nothing on being with him. It is like the best. And I think for me, I used to see prayer as work. Have you ever been there, where you're like, okay, gotta pray, I guess. I gotta figure out some words to say, I think. And I'm in public, so I gotta make them good, What's the biggest word I know? No, not good enough. In prayer, it felt like work. But now, for me, it just feels like rest. And if I'm trying to pinpoint what happened, one of the things that I just started doing in my prayer life is I just sat down and I said, God, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to make everything is about you. For the next 5 minutes, you're the most important thing in my life. And, as I'm sitting there and I'm praying, my to-do list would kind of creep in, and I'd be like, no, that's not as important. Only God is important in this moment. And I would think about all the, a fight that I had, or my daughter needs this or whatever. But I'm like, no, for the next 5 minutes only, God is the most important thing. Do you know how hard it is just for 5 minutes to make God the most important thing in your life? It is so hard. But as soon as I got to a place where I could do that, it felt like rest. It felt like sinking into that rhythm like that distance runner talked about. Because all of a sudden, I don't have to do anything for the next 5 minutes. I can just rest from my to-do list. I don't have to worry about anything else. I can put that aside because only God matters. And in that moment, I gotta tell you, my soul found rest. And so that's not necessarily in the Bible, although I could probably show you a lot of Psalms that talk about that. It's just in my own life. I hope that's helpful. This week, I woke up late one morning, and I knew that I was going to be late for a meeting that I had. And so I took a shower really quick, and I'm brushing my teeth really quick. And my daughter, my 5-year-old, her name is Saoirse. It's a Greek or Gaelic name, and we named her that because it means freedom. And I want her to know what freedom is like in Christ, and so we named her Saoirse. It's also a beautiful name, but she's got this fire red hair. And it's curly, so it's just everywhere, especially in the morning. And these, just deep ocean blue eyes. And she's like a typical Irish baby, pasty white, like, oh my goodness, don't let the sun touch you, honey. It's not going to be good for you. And she's super into Frozen, like all little kids. And so she's wearing her pajamas, our Frozen pajamas. It looks like Elsa's dress in Frozen. And she walks into my bathroom as I'm brushing my teeth. And she's holding this basket that she got for Christmas, and she's really into hair, and so there's a lot of combs and brushes and little curling things, they're plastic, not real. And she walks up to me and she says, "Papa, can I do your hair?" And I'm like, "I'm late, honey. I can't do it. I'm sorry. Maybe we could do it when I get home. I'm running. I'm too fast. I've got too much to do. I got to move fast this morning." And I'm just brushing my teeth, and I kept looking at myself in the mirror because I knew that if I looked at her, I'd be done. And so I'm just trying to even turn my head a little bit, and she didn't do anything. She just stood there and looked at me. And I'm like, and I looked down at her, and she's just, "Can I do your hair, Papa?" Okay, I'm gonna be late, but okay. So I sat down on the ground because so that she could reach my hair, and she just stood right in front of me and began to comb my hair and brush it. And I'm just sitting there, and what I realized is that when she's doing this, I have this front row seat to her face. And I just watched her eyes follow the comb, and I watched her smile when she just got it in the right place. And I just started to cry because I almost missed that because I was so busy. And I got to tell you, I walked out of that moment just I felt like I rested because it was just oh, I feel so full now. And I've got a 5-year-old who's amazing, and she loves me. And if I can have that with a 5-year-old little girl who on her best days is like that and on her worst days is like a demon, how much more could you get that if you could just make God the most important thing for 5 minutes? And just sit with him? Man, I think your soul would find rest in that moment. And so that's the rhythm that Jesus does. We saw that he starts his day with relationships, and he gives and he receives, and then he moves to rest. And for him, he finds rest in prayer. And in prayer, he just, we see this. He goes to this desolate place. He gets all the distractions out of the way, and he just focuses. It's just about God, and he receives rest from God in that moment. And so here's the last little part of the rhythm. I want you to see this. So he's praying. He's out in this desolate place. And Simon, that's Peter, and those who were with him, they searched for him. And they found him, and they said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said to them, "Let's go on to the next town, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out." And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. The next piece of the Jewish rhythm that Jesus is kind of following is they would start their day with relationships, they would then rest, and then they would partner with God to work. That's how they saw it. They would, out of this rest with God, they would then go with him to work. And what I want you to see about how Jesus does that is he is working with the Creator to renew creation, right? He's going around and he's healing people, and he's casting out demons, he's saving them. He's working with the Creator, not his Creator, because he's God, he's uncreated. So working with the Creator to renew creation. And I think sometimes we really mess this rhythm up because we like to go to work to get creation for ourselves. I think sometimes we go to work because we're like, man, I just saw my neighbor and he just bought that new riding mower and he's got a cup holder and mine doesn't have a cup holder. And I really want to put my iced tea or whatever it is you put in your lawn as you're going, whatever it is. And I just want to put it in my cup holder. And so I got to go to work to get the money to get more stuff. And all of a sudden, work becomes about creation. Instead of partnering with your Creator to renew creation, work becomes about getting stuff for you. And I think sometimes we also do this for work, like we have this ambition that is driving us. Now, ambition is awesome. If you have an ambition to start like a non-charity that, like, I don't know, gets people in Africa water or something like that, that's awesome. Like, do that. But Paul talks about this selfish ambition. And I think that's bad because it's selfish ambition. Did you get that? And here's the thing. That ambition can drive us to work to create our own world instead of partnering with our Creator to renew creation. And here's the thing. Whenever we're working for creation to get more stuff for ourselves, I want you to understand this. You're breathing at the bottom. Because here's the thing. The work that you exert to get what you want will never equal your input. Your output will always be greater than your input. Has anybody in this room ever got a new car? Ever? What was that like? You got a new car? Oh, it's new. Look at all the buttons. I can push this button and things happen. It's amazing. And it's just like, it's the coolest thing. I drive a Prius, and it's a 2004, and there's this little display, and it tells me if I'm using the electric engine or the gas engine. It's because it's a synergy. It works together. And I remember for the first year, I was like, only electric, all right? And if I just ease off the gas a little bit, oh, nailed it. Look at that gas mileage, 64 miles to the gallon. Oh, this is awesome. And that was like my first year with my Prius, right? Guess what I do now? Man, I got to get here fast. I don't care about that. Turn that gas one on. That's just kind of how it goes, right? Have you ever noticed this? When you get what you want, it doesn't fill you in the way that you wanted it to. When we're working for creation, the energy that we output will never equal the energy that we receive from it, that we input. But here's the thing. When you work with your Creator to renew creation, all of a sudden you've stepped into something different. All of a sudden you've partnered with the source of life to bring life, just like Jesus does. And so that's Jesus' rhythm in work. If I was Jesus, I'd be like, okay, God, here's the thing. I just did this thing in Capernaum. They really like me there. I don't know if you noticed that. They love me. And so I think I'm going to hang out here with my new friends because it's pretty cool there. I'm making some progress here, God. I'm meeting my number goals here, God. We got the whole town out, God, okay? But Jesus is like, no, God sent me to renew this, to renew creation. And so he goes to surrounding towns. It's not about him. It's not about creating his own little world. It's about partnering with the Creator to renew creation. If you can step into that, you'll start breathing up here instead of down here. And you can actually get stuff done then. Have you ever noticed this? People in your office, they like take a break after 15 minutes. And then that's their break. But then they need kind of like a break from that break. You ever notice that? Like, oh man. And here's what's happening. You're like, I just don't want to go to work right now. I'm here, but I don't want to be here. Have you ever woken up in the morning and been like, I hate what I do. I'm going to call in sick today. Oh, and it gives you so much anxiety. I think that happens when we are working for ourselves because our output isn't matching our input. And so it becomes so draining because you're breathing down here. But as soon as you partner with your Creator to renew creation, you'll start seeing renewal in your work as well. So this is Jesus' rhythm. He starts with relationships. He gives and he receives. He moves to rest, and he sees prayer as deep rest, being with God as deep soul rest, and then he partners with God to renew creation. It goes to work. That's his rhythm. Relationships, rest, work, and God is at the center of all of this. I think in our world, we start our day in the morning, right? And how many of you, just come on, we got to be honest, how many of you are on social media the first thing in the morning? Anybody? Amen. Me too. Social media, first thing in the morning. I'm not saying that that's bad. Maybe that's a part of your rhythm. But here's what I would ask yourself. Starting the day with work, with like seeing how everybody else is doing so I know what I got to do, and then going to work so I can get the stuff, so I can get the money to get the stuff, and then coming home and continuing to work with your family, giving, making sure the kids get to bed on time, making sure they get fed, making whatever, or hanging out with your friends. I got to go help this, and giving, never receiving, and then finally going to bed. One of my favorite contemporary authors says that we wake up tired and we go to bed not having gotten enough done. We didn't get enough rest, and then we go to bed not having got enough done, and we're just on this rat race, this hamster wheel where we're constantly running because we don't have the right rhythm. And most of us settle for breathing up here because we're not breathing down here because it feels like at least we're making it a little bit. But here's what I want you to know. You could have more. You could have more of God. There's so much more in him than we ever understand. We just sang this song, Worthy, Worthy, and I'm going to mince up the words, but some of the words we can't comprehend how much of a mystery he is. It's such a mystery. There's so much more in him than you can ever understand. And so what would it look like if you changed your rhythm? If you got the right rhythm, so that all of a sudden now you're empowered, you're breathing up here, and you can go further in your spiritual journey. What would that look like? And so just practically to close, I'm going to bring the band up, and I'm going to walk you through this real quick here. Can we put that slide up for me? Bam. Here's one way that you can create your own rhythm. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to create 3 lists. The first list is things that are life-giving for you. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to set a timer on your phone for 5 minutes, okay? Because what you're going to do is you're going to write for 30 seconds, you're going to get 4 things and be like, okay, I'm done. No. Set a timer for 5 minutes and make this list as long as you possibly can. Life-giving things. Maybe it's like gardening for you. Maybe it's maybe it's playing video games. I don't know. Maybe just things that are life-giving. And then in the second list, I want you to write things that are life-draining. Things that you do that suck the life out of you. And then for the last list, I want you to write out things that you have to do. Because sometimes we'd like to put the life-draining things, we like to just cut them out, but you can't do that with everything, right? Some things you have to do. You have to go to work. You have to have a relationship with your brother-in-law who's just, just saying. And so sometimes there's people and things that we'd like to cut out, but here's the thing, you're related to them. You're supposed to be loving them. And so you have to do that. Then what I want you to do is draw 3 boxes. You're going to have relationships, rest, and work. And what you're going to do then is in your relationships, work some life-giving things into there. Create a things to avoid list in there, the things that are life-draining for you, things that you kind of want to avoid. And things that you have to do, things that have to happen in your relationship. And can I just make this suggestion? As you're writing out things that you have to do in your relationships, consider your partner, your friend, your kids, consider their love language. What do you have to do to make them feel loved? And then do the same for rest and work. And then basically the third step is then to how do I craft this into my life? How do I make my life a rhythm like this so that I'm giving and receiving in my relationships, so that I'm resting with God, in God, and so that I can partner with him to go then and do the work. Because I think when we get the right rhythm, that will help us go far. Let me pray. Father God, I thank you.